Welcome to Taking Stock. I'm Amanda Lang. Coming up on the show, Canada is staking its claim in electric vehicles, but are we ahead of the curve? And the cost of living is still high, and it's stressing us out. Plus, with more generations working together than ever, what do the old bosses need to know about their young employees? That's all ahead. First, for the week that was in business, it's time for the briefs. Inflation edged higher in the U.S. last month, with prices up 3.4% compared to a year previous. That was a little hotter than November's 3.1% gain, and it underscores that in both the U.S. and Canada, the fight against inflation could be a bumpy one, even in its final stages. The data and inflation data in Canada next week may change the view of how soon borrowing costs will come down. A record number of Canadians are stressed about their finances. That's according to a regular survey by MNP. Not only are a growing number of us unable to pay more than the minimum balance on credit cards and lines of credit, and increasing numbers say they feel isolated and anxious as a result. Early signs that the U.S. consumer was feeling good this holiday season came from several retailers. Lululemon, Abercrombie & Fitch, Crocs, and American Eagle all said sales were good over the important period ahead of the holidays, and that was in contrast to expectations for a more tepid showing from shoppers. It was a bad news week for Boeing, starting with a door blowing off a plane mid-flight, followed by the grounding by regulators of many of its 737 MAX 9 aircraft, and then news that the issues that affected the Alaska Air flight were found in other planes. No Canadian airlines fly the MAX 9. Japanese automaker Honda is reportedly considering Canada as the location for an electric vehicle plant. Those reports suggest the investment could be worth more than $18 billion and include battery production as well. Officials from the federal government plan to meet with Honda this week, no doubt looking to sweeten the pot. Investors interested in owning Bitcoin got a new way to do it this week after U.S. market regulators greenlit new investment vehicles for the cryptocurrency. 11 different exchange-traded funds will offer exposure to Bitcoin for those who don't want to own it directly but do want exposure to its price. Experts caution that the investments will carry the same risk the underlying cryptocurrency does, and that investors should not mistake easier access for a seal of approval by regulators. In what may be a triumph of hope over reality, Shell has inked a 20-year deal to buy liquefied natural gas from a proposed BC plant. The agreement for 2 million metric tons of LNG from the Silicim's development is dependent on the plant being built at all. It has yet to pass regulatory hurdles. If built, Shell might see its gas in 2028. And those are your business briefs. Attracting more electric battery and vehicle production to Canada fits well with the federal government plan to phase out gas-powered vehicles in Canada by 2035. Industry players say the effort is out of step with the U.S. market and might even be the wrong approach to achieve our goals. Brian Kingston is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Brian, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on.
So let's just start with this goal we have of zero-emission vehicles, 100% by 2035. Is that achievable in your view?
Simply put, no. And the reason is the government hasn't done enough to address the key barriers to electrification that are facing Canadians. They've made it very clear as they've developed this regulation that it will have disproportionate and negative impacts on low-income Canadians, northern Canadians, rural Canadians, because there is a price gap between gas-powered vehicles and electric vehicles, and because we don't have enough charging infrastructure. So if we don't address those two barriers, achieving 100% sales in 11 short years is impossible.
So in that context, the government is working hard. The federal and provincial governments are spending a lot to attract some of this production here. Are you supportive of that side of the equation, even though the other side may not be there?
Absolutely. And this is actually one of the biggest reasons we're concerned with the federal government's approach with a zero-emission vehicle sales mandate. A huge amount of work has gone into attracting investment into Canada, matching President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act to put forward a competitive package for global manufacturers to put production here in Canada. And one of our key selling features here is that we have aligned regulations with the United States. Successive governments have understood that since the 1960s. And now we have a government that's taken a different approach. They've come forward with a Canada unique regulation. So this is worrisome. We got to align with the Americans and compete for new investment if we want to win in this transition.
So let's drill into that, because I'm not seeing a lot of this out there, and it feels pretty important. We've been in lockstep with that U.S. market for decades now in order to make our production match theirs. How are our targets out of alignment with theirs in a way that will hamper us here?
We're really going back to the Auto Pact. There's been a recognition that for Canada to have an automotive industry, we've got to have duty-free access into the U.S. market, and we have to align our regulations with the United States as much as possible so that automakers are operating within an integrated North American market. We've been very successful in doing that, and if you just look at the most recent NAFTA renegotiation, that was a Team Canada effort to maintain Canada's access to the U.S. market. Now we have a government that's taking a different approach. Instead of aligning our GHG tailpipe emissions with the US EPA, which are very stringent, they're introducing this very unique sales mandate, which decouples Canada from that market. This is worrisome. If we align with the Americans, we will get to the same environmental outcome while growing our automotive industry.
We only have 30 seconds here, Brian, and it's kind of a weird question, but any idea why the government would do that? Depart in this way from standard practice?
There's been this view that we need an EV mandate to secure electric vehicle supply in Canada. That may have been the case years ago, but right now we have gone from 3 models in market to 77. There's 40 more coming this year. The EVs are here. We need forward-looking policy, not rear view.
Brian, so good to have you. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Brian Kingston is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Vehicles Manufacturers Association. Coming up, inflation may be down from its peak, but prices for essential items are still way too high for comfort. Stay with us.